I was on a table getting a new heart. My family was 3 miles away toasting my brother's promotion with champagne. My name is Wilhelmina, and I found out exactly where they'd been the moment I woke up. 3 weeks later, they called asking me to co-sign a car loan. This story does not slow down. Not for one single paragraph. Stay with me. Fast context, because I'm not slowing down to give it to you. I'd been in heart failure for 2 years, waiting on a transplant list that moves slower than anyone tells you it will. My younger brother, Desmond, got promoted to regional director at his firm about 4 months before this story starts. My transplant call, the actual call, the one you wait years for, the one that means a matching heart just became available and you have maybe 4 hours to get to the hospital, came on a Thursday afternoon. Desmond's celebratory promotion dinner, already booked for 2 weeks, was scheduled the exact same Thursday evening. I want you to sit with that collision for 1 second before I keep moving, because I didn't get to sit with it at all. I was in an ambulance within the hour. I called my mother from the pre-op holding area because I needed someone there, because you're supposed to have someone there, because every single piece of transplant literature they hand you says have a support person present for when you wake up. She picked up on the fourth ring, already sounding like she was somewhere loud. Mom, they found a heart. I'm at the hospital right now. I need someone here. Oh my God. Wow, okay, that's huge news. We're actually at Desmond's dinner right now. Honey, it's already started. Can Aunt Cece come sit with you instead? Aunt Cece lives 2 hours away. I was being wheeled toward an operating room in 40 minutes. I want to tell you I had some perfect, composed response to that question. I didn't. I just said, okay, and handed the phone to a nurse, because that's genuinely all the bandwidth I had left in that exact moment. I woke up roughly 6 hours later with a new heart beating in my chest, and not one single member of my family in the room. A transplant coordinator, a woman I'd met exactly twice before, was the person holding my hand when my eyes opened. I want to describe that specific moment, because it's the one I keep coming back to, the profound, physical vulnerability of open heart surgery, the actual literal fact of someone else's heart now living inside my body, and the complete absence of anyone who shared my blood in that room to witness it. My family arrived the next morning. Cheerful. Still, unmistakably, riding the high of the night before. My mother mentioned, twice, unprompted, how well the toast had gone for Desmond, how the restaurant had done a beautiful private room. I lay in that hospital bed, my chest freshly wired shut, and listened to a recap of a dinner party while I was still hooked to more monitors than I could count. I want to move fast through the recovery, because the story doesn't slow down there either. 3 weeks later, still in outpatient cardiac rehab, still not cleared to drive, my phone rang. My father. Hey kiddo, how's the recovery going? Listen, I wanted to ask you something. Desmond's looking at a new car, something that fits the new job, more professional, you know. The dealership wants a cosigner given some of his old credit stuff. You're doing so well financially. Would you mind co-signing for him? 3 weeks. 3 weeks after waking up alone with someone else's heart, while my entire family raised glasses across town, I was being asked to legally tie my credit to my brother's car loan. You want me to co-sign a car loan? I said. 3 weeks after nobody showed up for my transplant. Silence. The specific silence of someone who genuinely had not connected those two facts until I said them out loud in the same sentence. That's not really related, my father said. This is just a practical thing. You're in a good position to help right now. I declined. I want to tell you that declining, in that exact moment, still recovering, still exhausted, still relearning how to walk up a single flight of stairs without stopping, took more out of me than almost anything else in this entire ordeal, because every instinct I'd built over a lifetime told me to just say yes and keep the peace. I didn't. And what came out over the following weeks? Desmond telling me, with what I can only describe as genuine confusion, I figured you'd understand. You always handle stuff like this so well. Told me everything I needed to know about exactly how my family had learned to treat my resilience as a resource rather than a trait worth protecting. It's been 14 months since that transplant. My new heart is working perfectly. My relationship with my family is not, and I've stopped pretending those two facts aren't connected. I think, more than anything, about waking up in that recovery room, a transplant coordinator's hand instead of my mother's, and how completely that single, silent hour told me everything I needed to know about where I actually ranked. I want to back up now and give you the fuller shape of this, because the speed of that opening is exactly how it felt living through it, and I think you deserve the rest of it at the same pace. I'd been diagnosed with a rare, progressive cardiomyopathy almost 3 years before this story starts, a condition that gradually weakens the heart muscle until it simply can't keep up with the body's demands anymore. I want to be honest about what those 2 years of waiting actually looked like, because I think it matters to understanding exactly what that Thursday represented. fatigue that never lifted no matter how much I slept. A growing list of things I could no longer physically do: stairs, groceries, eventually even a short walk to my own mailbox. Regular hospital admissions when my heart function dipped low enough to require 4 medication just to keep me stable. A pager, essentially, that I carried everywhere, that could go off at any hour of any day, telling me a matching heart had become available and I had a narrow window to get to the hospital before that window closed forever. I want to describe what my family knew about all of this, because I think it's important context. They knew. Not vaguely, specifically. My mother had been to several of my cardiology appointments in the earlier stages. My father had helped me fill out disability paperwork when I could no longer work full-time. Desmond himself had, on more than one occasion, told me how much he admired how I was handling everything. Language that, in hindsight, feels like exactly the kind of comfortable, hands-off admiration that lets a person feel involved without ever actually having to show up. I want to tell you about the specific Thursday itself, because the compression of that opening doesn't do justice to how fast and disorienting it actually was to live through. The call came at 2:47 in the afternoon. I remember the exact time because I'd been staring at my phone off and on for 2 years, and some part of me had rehearsed this exact moment more times than I could count. A matching heart. A donor. Get to the hospital within the window. I called Callum, my husband, first, and he was home within 11 minutes. Already packing a bag he'd kept half ready by the door for exactly this scenario for the better part of a year. I called my mother next, standing in our kitchen, my hands shaking in a way that had nothing to do with my heart condition and everything to do with pure, disbelieving adrenaline. I want you to sit with her response again, in full this time, because the abbreviated version doesn't fully capture the specific tone of it. "Oh my God, wow, okay, that's huge news. We're actually at Desmond's dinner right now. Honey, it's already started. Can Aunt Cece come sit with you instead? Not, we're leaving right now. Not, we'll meet you there." A genuine, immediate pivot to logistics for someone else to fill the gap, delivered in the same cheerful tone she might have used to reschedule a lunch date. I want to describe the drive to the hospital because it was, in its own way, one of the strangest experiences of my life. Genuine, overwhelming hope about the transplant itself, layered directly on top of a very specific, very cold understanding, forming in real time, that my family was choosing not to be there for it. Callum drove. I sat in the passenger seat making the calls the transplant team needed, insurance confirmations, emergency contact updates, while trying not to fully process what my mother's response had just told me. I want to walk you through the pre-op process itself, because it happens fast once you arrive, and because the isolation of it is exactly the part that still sits heaviest with me. Consent forms. A final round of blood work. A nurse explaining the surgery timeline in careful, practiced language clearly designed to be calming, none of which actually calmed me, because underneath the excitement was a growing, specific loneliness. Every other patient bay around me, as far as I could tell through the curtains, had a family member holding a hand, and mine had Callum, wonderful and steady as he was, standing in for an entire family that had chosen, in the span of one phone call, a restaurant instead. I asked the pre-op nurse, at one point, almost involuntarily, whether it was normal for family not to make it in time for something like this. She paused, just slightly, before answering. The specific pause of someone choosing her words carefully, and said, "It happens. Everyone's situation is different." I understood, even through the haze of everything else happening, that this was as diplomatic a way as she had of saying, "Not really, no." I want to describe waking up, because the compressed version doesn't fully capture how strange that moment actually was. Coming up out of anesthesia is disorienting under the best circumstances. A slow, confusing swim back toward consciousness, machines beeping, a specific soreness in your chest that tells you, before you're even fully awake, that something significant has happened to your body. I remember blinking against fluorescent light, trying to orient myself, and finding the transplant coordinator, a kind woman named Odalise whom I'd met exactly twice before during the workup process, sitting in the chair beside my bed, her hand resting lightly on the rail near mine, the closest thing to a comforting physical presence in that entire room. "You did wonderfully," she told me. "Your new heart is beating well. Everything looks good." I asked her, my voice barely functional yet, whether my family had called. She checked, gently, and told me my mother had left a voicemail with the nurse's station around 10 that evening, asking for an update, and that Callum had stepped out briefly to grab coffee, but would be right back. I want to describe Callum's return, because it was, in its own way, one of the only genuinely comforting moments of that entire first day. Him walking back in, seeing my eyes open, and the specific, unguarded relief on his face that told me, more than any words could have, that at least one person had actually needed me to wake up. My family arrived the next morning, roughly 18 hours after the surgery ended. I want to describe that visit in more detail than I gave it initially, because the details matter. My mother came in first, bearing a small bouquet from the hospital gift shop, cheerful in a way that felt, given everything, almost surreal. "You look great," she said. "How are you feeling? Oh, by the way, you should have seen Desmond's toast last night. It was so sweet, the whole restaurant applauded." I want to be honest that I don't think I fully processed, in that exact moment, the specific wrongness of that sentence. I was still deep in the fog of post-surgical recovery, still working hard just to stay oriented and present. It was only over the following days, as the fog cleared and I had more capacity to actually reflect, that the full shape of what had happened settled into something I could name clearly. My family had made a choice, a real, deliberate choice between two events happening at the same time, and I had lost. I want to tell you about the recovery period itself, because it stretched on for weeks, and it mattered enormously to how the rest of this story unfolded. Heart transplant recovery is intense. Daily monitoring for signs of rejection, a demanding medication schedule, cardiac rehabilitation sessions 3 times a week, an entire structured relearning of how to move through the world in a body that now contains someone else's heart. Callum took 2 full months off work to manage the bulk of my care during that period, driving me to appointments, managing my medications, doing the actual, sustained, daily work of supporting someone through major recovery. The exact kind of work my family had, in the initial moment that mattered most, chosen not to show up for. I want to describe the 3 weeks between my discharge and that phone call from my father, because I think it matters to understanding just how raw everything still was when the request arrived. I was still not cleared to drive. I was still attending cardiac rehab 3 times a week, still managing a complex medication schedule with real, serious consequences if I got it wrong, still, in every practical sense, deep in the most vulnerable stretch of an entire recovery process. I want to give you the fuller version of that phone call, because the compressed version doesn't capture how completely disconnected my father's tone was from everything I was still going through. "Hey kiddo, how's the recovery going? Listen, I wanted to ask you something." A pause, casual, the kind you'd use before asking someone to help move a couch. Desmond's looking at a new car, something that fits the new job, more professional, you know. The dealership wants a cosigner given some of his old credit stuff. "You're doing so well financially. Would you mind co-signing for him?" I want to describe the specific quality of my own silence in that moment, because it wasn't calculated. It was genuine, disbelieving shock, trying to process the sheer scale of the disconnect between what I was still living through daily and what was casually being asked of me. "You want me to co-sign a car loan?" I said, once I found my voice again, 3 weeks after nobody showed up for my transplant. I want to describe the conversation that followed in more detail, because it revealed, layer by layer, exactly how my family had processed, or failed to process, what they'd actually done. My father's first response was defensive, insisting the two things weren't related, that Desmond's promotion dinner had been booked for weeks and couldn't reasonably be canceled at the last minute. An explanation that conveniently ignored the fact that a transplant call, by its very nature, cannot be scheduled in advance either, and that any reasonable family, given the choice between a dinner reservation and a matter of life and death, would understand which one actually mattered more. I want to tell you about the conversation I eventually had with Desmond directly, about a week later, because it was, in its own way, the most clarifying one of the entire ordeal. I asked him plainly whether he'd ever considered, once he learned I was in surgery that same evening, stepping out of his own dinner even briefly to check on me, or asking a family member to leave early to be with me instead. His answer, delivered with what I could tell was genuine, if belated, discomfort. "I didn't want to make a big deal out of leaving in the middle of my own thing. And honestly, I figured you had good doctors, you were in good hands. I didn't think you'd really need us there for the actual surgery part. I didn't think you'd really need us there." I want to sit with that phrase, because I think it's the specific detail that reframed my entire understanding of my family's baseline assumptions about me. Not malice, exactly, but a long-established, comfortable belief that I was someone who simply didn't require the same kind of presence and support that other people's milestones apparently demanded. I declined the co-signing request. I want to be honest that this was, in some ways, one of the hardest boundaries I've set with my family, coming as it did while I was still physically weak, still emotionally raw, still in the middle of relearning how to trust my own body again. But I also want to be honest that something in me had shifted permanently in that recovery room, waking up to Odalise's hand instead of my mother's. And I found I simply could not go back to absorbing disappointment silently the way I might have before. I want to tell you about the months since, because they've required significant, ongoing work to renegotiate what my relationship with my family actually looks like going forward. I've been in therapy since about 6 weeks after the transplant, specifically to process not just the physical trauma of the surgery itself, but the compounding emotional weight of facing it essentially alone. My therapist has helped me understand that the specific vulnerability of major surgery creates its own particular category of need, not just physical support, but a kind of witnessed presence that matters enormously to how safe and held a person feels during one of the most frightening experiences of their life, and that my family's absence during that exact window wasn't a small, forgivable scheduling conflict, but a genuine failure to show up during the single moment I needed them most. I think, more than anything, about that specific hour in the recovery room, disoriented, still finding my way back to full consciousness, and how completely the absence of my family in that room told me something about my place in this family that I'm not sure I would have let myself see so clearly any other way. It's been 14 months now. My new heart is functioning beautifully. My cardiology team describes my recovery as close to ideal as they see. My relationship with my parents and Desmond remains genuinely strained, still working through the same kind of slow, difficult renegotiation of expectations that I imagine anyone who's finally stopped absorbing a lifetime pattern silently has to go through. I don't know yet exactly where that relationship lands, long term. What I do know is that I will never again mistake my family's comfort with my resilience for evidence that I don't need them showing up. If you've ever woken up from the most vulnerable moment of your life to an empty room, only to get a phone call weeks later asking for a favor, I want to hear about it. Some things you only understand once you've survived them completely alone.